Welcome to the Awaken Podcast. My name is Natasja Pelgrom, and we are here for the very first time live through a Breaking Convention, a conference on psychedelic science, multidisciplinary approaches, and we are at Exeter University. And I just wanted to also share with you today that we are having multiple interviews streaming live through this platform. But of course, you're also able to watch this at a different time, and you're able to eventually receive this in audio format on all the podcast platforms. I am here with someone really special because actually in season 2, we already did an interview because we met at Breaking Convention 2021 or was it 22? 21, yeah. 21. Yeah. So, but, you know, life changes, stories develop, and I appreciate Angela so much. So I wanted to bring her on one more time, and I will share, even though we know each other, I will share a little bit of her bio so you can at least pick up on why we're here today. So Angela Prusa is a Namibian-based cannabis advocate, integration practitioner, and community builder. Founder of Cannabis and Hemp Association in Namibia and a co-creator of Roots Herbal. She supports trauma-informed healing through sacred plant medicines, and Angela's work is rooted in reverence, reciprocity, decolonial community care, and bridging indigenous wisdom, somatic integration, and earth-based living.
Thank you.
So that's my intro. So before we start, what are you doing here specifically on Breaking Convention?
So I am actually going to be giving a talk in the psychedelic cinema, and the topic of the talk is cannabis, hemp, reform, and legacy farmers. So I was invited to come and speak on cannabis, and I decided that I was going to use the time that I have to actually speak about the legacy farmers in the Ponderland of South Africa, who are basically the guardians of an ancient land race. And, you know, like, I think a very important topic, because even though cannabis has been legalized in South Africa, these farmers are not really benefiting from that model. So I'm going to be giving a talk on that. And I also have a stall in the marketplace where I am selling jewelry from the beautiful Junkwasi communities of Namibia, of the Kalahari, and also talking about an indigenous gathering that I am co-creating, supporting the communities to create in Namibia for this September.
Yes. And we'll touch upon that because I think it's a really important thing. And those of you that are watching this live or watching at a different time, we're now in April 2025. And there is an event going to take place in September this year. But first, I would love for you to share a little bit your story, because, you know, it's so rare to find someone with such unique perspective and experience in life. So tell us just really briefly a little bit about your path in cannabis and this activism that you're in.
Yeah. So I'm very privileged to have been born and raised in Namibia.
1 second. I'm just going to do your beautiful curly hair to the side, because we're our own tech team as well, because we want to make sure microphones are working. Yes.
Shall I move it to
No,
this side?
it's good. No,
Okay.
it's good. Sorry.
So I was born and raised in Namibia, and having been raised under the apartheid system, i.e. being a beneficiary of that system because of my white skin, but having been brought up in the family that had different ideals than the norm, like I, from a very young age, really came to understand the conditioning around how we colonize the mind. And so I spent a long time, like, really, you know, having to unlearn the systemic racism and hierarchy and privilege that was, you know, like, really ingrained into my cells. And so I think this has given me a really unique perspective in then my journey with the cannabis plant, which I have been on a beautiful relationship and journey with for the last almost, over 20 years now, working in the cannabis industry in California, but also going to places like Morocco, spending a lot of time with the communities there, and learning and seeing the way that traditionally the relationship is with this plant, and then also with a lot of the Rasta communities in Namibia. And so that's where my knowledge and my learning has come from, and my understanding of how to be in right relationship with the plant. And from that, I have, since 2015-16, been an advocate for legalization of cannabis, the entirety of it. So that includes also hemp. But really focusing on a legislation that at the core of it has the well-being of the people, the most marginalized, the indigenous and local communities, the rural communities, the well-being of nature, so soil, water, air, and ecosystem, and just trying to really create a blueprint. And we're still in the process after 10 years of advocating, in a system in Namibia where it's still illegal, but really wanting to create legislation that when it does become legal, that legislation, prioritizes the voices of the indigenous and the communities who have been the guardians of this plant, the communities who have been harmed by prohibition, and also that there is reciprocity and care for those, who have faced jail time, etc. Because I see a lot of talk around, we just need to get things legalized, we just need to get things decriminalized, but often it is like based on a Eurocentric understanding, and it is often based around, how much money can we make, and, like how can it benefit the healing of our mind, body, soul. But I feel like there's so much more nuances that are really needing to be considered to create a truly sustainable model that does not continue to perpetuate the harm. And so so my journey with cannabis in the communities has been incredible. And I think like the unique upbringing that I've had, and also the privilege of having learned from the communities and having close relationships. And also, like for 10 years, I've been privileged enough to be walking with and learning from the Wirarika traditions of Mexico, and really learning about right relationship and offerings and reciprocity with land and, spirit and the earth and water, etc. And so that's all really informed the way in which I work with the plant, and in how I make the decisions of how to show up and be a voice to this plant and bring a different perspective to the conversation.
Yeah, amazing. What if you would have a moment in time that you could change legislation, or you could change something that would significantly impact the relationship we have with these communities, or even the power that is still lacking in those communities? What do you feel is the most important change that can take place?
I think the most important change is probably, we have this understanding that's kind of like a blanket understanding, or it's just like, it's not even talked about, the fact that we base everything on European, Western science, psychology, systems of what is right or wrong, what is safe, what is not safe, but those systems don't work in the majority of the places, because that is a colonial system that does not take the whole of the ecosystem into account. Very often, for example, in Namibia as well, I've seen this with the government, having done years of work with them and really trying to, bring across a different message. They see the knowledge of, American standards or European standards as the kind of like guideline. But that does not relate to the landscape of what is happening in Namibia. It does not take into consideration the traditional use, the legacy farming, the traditional herbalists. It does not take into account, the very rural and marginalized communities. So I feel like that even the definition of hemp, is based on a Eurocentric definition of this is hemp, this is cannabis, which it does not really apply to other places in the world. And so I think that conversation is where it needs to change. It's like, it should be individual to each place and space, because the relationship with plants and medicine in this context of the Europe, the European, like as a whole union, the UK and America, is very different to what would be applicable in Africa, in Asia, in, South America. And so I think that point is, and this is what I try and highlight to people that I have conversations with, it's like, we need to move away from seeing the European, Western, science, knowledge, safety standards as being the one that dictates how policy, gets written or informs, or, like how policy shapes laws.
Would you say that we need to even, because one of the buzzwords that is very much active, and I think it's good, buzz is not something wrong,
no,
but is reciprocity, and being in that right relationship. What in its core meaning, what does that actually mean for someone that is curious about this topic but maybe not involved? What is that? What does it actually mean? Can you give it a bit of context?
Yeah, so it is a buzzword, and I think it's a little bit, I think often, like a little bit maybe like the carbon credits at the moment, where we can just, think we can take a flight and we just buy some carbon credits because some trees over there are going to be planted and it's going to be fine, but I think what we're lacking, and this is, for example, for me, a very disheartening thing around the whole plant medicine community as well, is the lack of relationship and commitment to the community and the plant and that territory. It takes relationship to understand what is reciprocity. It takes commitment to that place, because reciprocity is not just to the people, it's to the whole ecosystem. And the only way that you're going to be really understanding or in right relationship with reciprocity is like a long-term commitment. We just want like fast. We want fast now healing. We want healing, even if that means a species is going extinct, because we need to heal. We can use the buzzwords, reciprocity. But what does that mean? How does, I feel like it is about relationship. It is about commitment to a territory and a people, and even to a plant. It is like, can you commit for the next decade to be in right relationship, to learn from that community how to be in reciprocity with that ecosystem, with that plant, and then in a different sense, I learned about reciprocity from the Wirarika, and it is about, giving before you take, always making sure that before I take or before I receive, that I give something.
That's why you got chocolate from us before we started.
Exactly. That's why I took two. So it's, it's become one of my, and it's something that I, when people come for ceremony, or when I work with people with cannabis medicines, I always just invite people to maybe just go and bring an offering to that medicine before you take that medicine, and just give it some gratitude. You can leave a coin, you can leave a beautiful flower, you can write a poem, you can sing a song, you can give a gold ring to the water, whatever, the feeling. It's also about finding your own way with that, but even just coming into that relational understanding that everything, is so abundantly giving to us, and we're so used to just taking without the, like, it's that you wouldn't go into a shop and just, take your sandwich and walk out. You're expected to pay. And so, like that act of giving before you're receiving, before you're taking, like asking for permission, for me, that's been such a beautiful learning that's basically informed the majority of my waking up daily. And, it's definitely encouraged me to come into a relationship with territory and life around me, because also it brings you into presence, and it brings you into the awareness of all this life that is around you, that is gifting you this abundance, of like thriving beauty that you have access to. So that relationship, and then obviously going deeper, like having relationship with territory, with land, with community, that is based on, you know, like a commitment as well, you know, not a fleeting in and out. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is, and it's a movement now. It's the slow movement. It's pace, you know, and that kind of understanding that these choices that you make, that it's a devotional practice, and it doesn't matter if you're a clinician or you're a practitioner or you're an activist, you know, you're having a basic relationship to something that asks for time and presence. And so when you're speaking about gratitude, I think people have to also maybe understand that it's not like, oh, I'm going to be gratitude because then I gain something from it. It's actually the gratitude that you will never maybe gain anything, and just sitting with that practice. Yeah. And I want to weave that into actually a bit of a story, because I'm curious about cannabis and this medicine that is so strong in your life. And it's been strong in my life more from the recreational use in my teenage years in Amsterdam, and, you know, and all of the things that are involved around that. But when, you know, the story goes, when we have, let's say, a shadow relationship with a plant, it does the opposite of its healing with you. Right? So tobacco is one example where this is seen in. But how does this work with this feminine energy? It's a feminine quality, right?
Yeah.
How do I, because I keep on hearing she. A lot of people, when they say cannabis, she is, people speak to her as a she.
As a she. We love to label things.
Yeah, isn't it? So I'm curious about that perspective of that relationship, and I'm just curious about what's that for you.
So I'm going to speak only from my opinion, because that's what I can do. So I don't claim to be knowing.
Yes, great.
But for me, what I have found, you know, like you said, with a lot of these plant medicines, you know, because that includes cacao, that includes tobacco, that includes, you know, cocaine. Yeah. You know, that includes all these incredibly powerful plant teachers, plant medicines, you know, that communities used to have very sacred relationship with. And then we've turned them into a commodity to be mindlessly consumed. And so my relationship with cannabis as well, coming from a, I guess, very unhealthy relationship, you know, recreationally using cannabis. And then like more and more, like having a really hard time, like really suffering from anxiety with cannabis smoking, you know, and like paranoia, etc. To then try like understanding why, you know, and my relationship with this plant, I am very, like, I guess the last 15 years, I have been using this plant so sparingly. You know, even though I work with cannabis every day, like it's a co-creation, but it is not like for me consuming it. Like I do consume cannabis, but in a, you know, in a really mindful way, because I feel like this plant is so powerful. It is so powerful. You know, when we talk about ayahuasca and we talk about ibogaine and we talk about DMT, like I feel like cannabis is right up there with these plants, you know, and it has the potential for this incredible healing, you know, not just physiologically for the body, but you know, like for the psyche, for the mind, for the mental health. And I've had some of the deepest ceremonies with cannabis. And so I do believe that when we abuse, when we are not in right relationship, you know, that the plant whoops us.
Yes, yeah.
You know, because I have seen this, and it's also really interesting because looking at
in what way? In what way have you observed that?
So I have observed with myself the paranoia and the, you know, like, but I also want to say to that, like the difference of smoking cannabis that has not been tampered with.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, having smoked previously things like skunk and these really strong strains that have been, you know, genetically modified by humans to come out of its natural balanced form and into something, you know, that is not really resembling what it was, you know. And so I do feel like we do this. It's like with, you know, we take this perfectly balanced plant that nature has created, you know, and except, for example, you know, cannabis has hundreds of compounds. And in nature, you know, if you look at the ancient land races, you know, they're very low in THC. They have like a really good amount of CBD. You know, the CBD balances out the psychoactivity of the THC. You know, you have all the other cannabinoids. And so smoking that is a very different experience than smoking some really high-grade skunk, sensi
in the city center of Amsterdam.
In the city center of Amsterdam or in California, you know. And for me, having, you know, grown up with the bushweed in Namibia and like never having had any mental, you know, kind of like really feeling that whoa overwhelmingness of the plant, and then coming to Europe for the first time and to the UK and like smoking the strains here, and also like really developing an unhealthy relationship. I definitely felt that, you know, it was not I was not happy smoking, you know. I was often uncomfortable. I started to really feel anxious, you know. Whenever I would smoke, I started to get paranoid. And so I had to reevaluate my whole relationship with that plant. And I did that over many, many years. And, you know, now when I engage with the plant, I can sense this incredible, deep healing, you know. And I have seen it in other people that I have worked with, you know. It's like changing that relationship. You know, it's like you would not, obviously, cannabis as a medicine, yes, you know, like being utilized, you know, to support, but also it's like it's about finding the smallest amount possible, you know, for the desired effect, rather than just, you know, you wouldn't be drinking ayahuasca 50 times a day. You know? So I see it in the same light, you know. There is this incredibly powerful plant that we have really taken away from its original state of being. And I do think that there is always, everything has every cause and effect. You know, there is always how do you say it, like a reaction, you know. And so I do, and that's why I see a lot of people who struggle with cannabis, you know, who don't have a healthy relationship, who end up, you know, being really paranoid, who end up like being really, you know, like really needing it, you know, utilizing it as a crutch. And so, and that's also a part of what I, you know, work with people, is like coming into a healthy relationship with it.
Yes.
And reestablishing the relationship, you know. And that's why I also feel like cannabis ceremonies, I've been in some cannabis ceremonies, and it's been really beautiful to witness people come into a different relationship with that plant, you know, rather one of just like.
Can you share a little bit about from earth-based traditions and more the ritualistic ceremonies with cannabis, what you've seen and maybe how it's utilized? Is there before, for example, a way where it's utilized in feminine processes and during the moon time, or?
So I have not seen, but then I haven't actually gone looking for that, because I think for me, what I have like seen in the context of at home in Namibia and in Zambia and in Southern Africa and also in Morocco and in Turkey in the mountains, is like, you know, the elders, the grandmothers smoking, you know, like with their pipes mid-afternoon, smoking cannabis, you know, like it being smoked in community. You know, in the Rasta communities in Africa, like with real reverence given to the plant, and, you know, real embodied presence when smoking that plant, and real understanding as well that it's like it connects you to God. And the same in India, you know, I've experienced like smoking with the babas, and, you know, like where it's basically utilized to directly connect you to the divine, to the source. And so I'm sure that there is many of these rituals, you know.
So I'm hearing also is there's more community aspect to it. It's more a way of being in relationship with it than instead of a lot of that are working with plants, and now in the West is like, during the weekend I'm being booked to hold a ceremony, and the rest of the week I'm doing other things. Well, that is more embedded in the way of living with the plant.
Exactly. But I think this is with all of these medicine plants, and that's why often it's really interesting when we work with these plants that come from traditions that, like have community around these plants. And it is part of a lifestyle and part of a tradition, part of a bigger, network and environment. And then we take these plants out, and then we come into our really like isolated, really self-absorbed culture. And like you say, on the weekend we go and we drink that plant, and then we drink that plant, and then we go back to, without that communal understanding and the feeding of the spirits and the whole ecosystem. I do think that there is something to be said around having that ecosystem and that relationship that translates into everyday being with those, with those plants, and the understanding and the folklore and the mythology and the stories, and it's so woven into it, whereas we don't have that. And so I feel like it does create a bit of a glitch.
DJ mix. Glitch in the mix. It makes so much sense. Do you feel that it's something? No, let me rephrase that. Have you observed in the last, let's say, 5 years, a change in, I'm going to go a little bit to the side with the topic, a bit more metaphysical? Yeah, because you hold ceremonies, you do deep work in trauma work as well. And have you felt, if you want to speak into it, maybe this is not the moment, but I'm always curious to hear different perspectives on the metaphysical and the energetic space around plants and medicine. And because this isn't a plant where I work with, I'm curious if you're picking up, because I have picked up over the last 5 years that there is an energetic change within the broader field itself. And I'm curious if you picked up on anything, or you've seen it reflected by elders just maybe telling a story of, or leading you in a specific direction where you go, oh, I have to pay attention now.
Yeah, so I think everything is always moving and changing and evolving. I mean, so I think what we, within our setting of supporting people, the focus has always been on that. For example, the ceremony is only one small part, and like that it's part of a bigger, and trying to really incorporate things like the gratitude, and the being in reciprocity with, the plants that you're consuming, and taking that on as and so I'm trying to think back as to witnessing over this last few years, the energetical shift. I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of energetical shifts in the way that these plants work. And I kind of also feel like they're adapting to the times that we find ourselves in.
Yes. So you feel it's a co-creative and shift.
It's a co-creative shift. But I think that co-creative shift is really with the plants, it's the co-creation with the plants, it's like, because it's really interesting, like, there's so many incredible stories that are so mind-blowing, like of what people are experiencing, good and bad, or the way that space is held. We are in a time where, like, you can do so many different medicines all in one go, all in one weekend, and it's and there is probably, that's what is necessary for these times, I feel. And I guess also the plants have their own ideas as to where they are going and what they are doing, and then on the other hand, there is like, like, what is it anchored in? What is the practice then beyond? What is that deep commitment? And so I think this is what I really focus on in the work that I do. It's like, you know. So even in the preparations, like reciprocity, just coming into reciprocity,
Yes.
go and give an offering, you know, go and just become aware of the gifts that you are being given, you know. And so, and I feel as this practice has deepened, the work has changed in our field, you know, the energetics. I feel like, you know, like the co-creation has become more expansive. I'm not exactly, yeah.
Interesting. I know that, you know, in the beginning of this interview, shared already a little bit about the gathering. Can you speak about, because maybe it's also the ask of the time of this co-creative space, and speaking into the plants in a more expansive and co-creative space. And what is this gathering about, and why is it important now?
Yes. So I'm really privileged to support the communities to create this gathering.
Which
so
communities?
The communities are the Ovahimba community in Namibia and the Juntwasi communities in Namibia. And so basically they have been doing some incredible work around knowledge preservation with the University of Science and Technology, you know, of their knowledge preservation, creating digital libraries because of the changing, you know, in climate, modernity, encroaching, etc. They really wanted to create a library that is accessible for their future generations, you know, and which has brought the communities together, you know, in finding innovative ways of using, you know, this modern technology to support and preserve ancient technology. And so, and now it's the weaving of bringing together, you know, they really want to engage in dialogue with other indigenous communities. And so we are co-creating this beautiful gathering in Namibia, which is all about bringing indigenous wisdom keepers and community leaders together to be able to have conversations around, you know, knowledge preservation, around climate change and ways to be resilient, you know, in their territories, around ways of moving forward in these times. So part of the bigger vision weaving action that's happening, the gathering is one part. So the gathering is bringing together knowledge keepers from around the globe to come on this 2-week gathering in Namibia in the 2 different indigenous territories and be together, exchange knowledge, celebrate each other's culture, you know, tradition, share these really important conversations and create, you know, alliances and support, you know, across the oceans, basically. And then also to collectively do earth offerings together and some deep prayers, you know, and that, again, bringing that piece of reciprocity and, you know, having communities there that are, you know, doing payments to the earth, like as their continual offering towards the well-being of all of humanity, you know. So it's this beautiful gathering of all these different layers of coming together in indigenous territory, you know. It's by the indigenous, it's for the indigenous, and we're supporting them to make it happen, because obviously, you know, the elders are in the bush, and, you know, so we're like really trying to get the funding to make this a reality. But on the bigger, this gathering is supposed to be part and is part of this bigger vision of finding ways as well of compensation for the knowledge of the indigenous, you know, because I think also they've reached a point of where, you know, so much of their knowledge is being utilized, you know, it's like in all elements from medicine to environment to conservation, you know, but there's no compensation. And so it's looking at ways of how can they be compensated for their knowledge? How do they get a voice? You know, how is their voice amplified in the spaces of environment, conservation, plants, etc.? And as well, how can we support them to keep protecting the biodiversity? You know, they protect these incredible, like huge spaces and places of biodiversity. And how do we support them to keep making that a possibility for all of us? And again, it is for the bigger, it's for humanity. you know, because all of the actions that they do are essentially, you know, in mind with how do we continue supporting thriving life for everyone, you know. And so this has been my prayer. It's like, how am I in service to thriving life for humanity? You know, how can that, and so how can that look like? And so I'm really so excited and so humbled and just so incredibly honored to be, you know, co-creating this with them. And so I'm like, in the process of, you know, with an incredible team from the UNESCO Indigenous Cluster of Design and Technology, and the University of Science and Technology, and, you know, co-creating this with the communities. And so we're trying to raise funds. And because I think it's really time to honor that wisdom, to make sure it's reciprocated. And it is also, it's that commitment to that territory, to those communities. You know, it's that we're receiving so much. It's like we have to commit to give back.
Yeah, beautiful. And so do I understand correctly, is also from other earth-based traditions that are coming from other continents?
Yes.
And then coming to Namibia there.
Yes.
So the funding will support, of course, travel. It's really complex. People have to understand that getting people across the waters.
It costs a lot of money.
Yes, and visas and taking care.
And that's where all, so obviously everyone is working for free, those of us who are involved in this. And so all the money goes to basically supporting, bringing the elders across. So we have, you know, from the Arwako and the Kogi, from the Wirarika, from the Kero, from the Sami people, from the Maori, from the Aboriginal people, from the Penang in Malaysia, you know, from Uganda, from different African countries, elders, and also elders and wisdom keepers who are active in their communities, so that this thread keeps weaving. And we'll also have biodiversity days where people from the government come, you know, to listen to the communities, you know, and people who work in conservation or in environment. Yeah.
There's already a few kind of movements coming in like this. A friend of mine, Tricia Eastman with Ancestral Heart, is also very closely working with the Kogi and Center for Sacred Studies. Grandmother Jyoti as well is also with. So I feel that I think there is a web that is those that are really seers are understanding to step in and start weaving. To give, because the term is called pagamentos.
Exactly.
Right, so to really give offering to the earth and to restabilize its grid, its well-being, and everything around that. Amazing work. When is so the idea is that in September this would take place.
In September.
So if funding is needed, we'll add your website to the show notes, of course. Those of you who are listening on the podcast and not viewing this, there's all in the show notes. And that's where the funding goes towards. Is there anything else that you feel is really needed at this time, besides the weaving and this co-creation, that people, you know, listening to this in their own home, that's something that they could do, or you feel like, oh, this is maybe an invitation to share, for you to share, an invitation for them to be active as activists in reciprocity?
As activists in reciprocity, I mean, like, I think what I would like to share is, like, just even in your garden, you know, or if there is a tree, if you live in the city and there is a tree, maybe just every day go to that tree and, like, go and give it a little bit of, you know, something, go and meet it, go and, like, you know, introduce yourself, go and leave it an offering. Because for me, I feel like, you know, coming into gratitude and even just waking up and receiving, like, the bird song and the sun and, you know, this incredible body, like, we're breathing air, you know, we're constantly in reciprocal relationship with, like, you know, my out breath is the in breath of the plants and their out breath is my in breath, you know, and, like, coming into that awareness, I feel like it's when we start tuning in and vibrating with the universe around us. You know, it's such a beautiful, powerful, so simple, but so profound, you know? And so that is always, like, my gift to people, is just go and, like, you know, bring a flower, bring a poem, you know, like, just go and sit with the tree and and see what emerges from that relationship.
So we're coming to an end. I wonder, is there anything else that you would like to share or say that I haven't asked?
I mean, we can talk for hours. You and me can talk for hours,
Yes.
but no, I think that
We're
it's been good.
I'm going to close with a few random questions,
Yes.
as always on the Awaken podcast. So, if you could travel in the future or in the past, where would you go and why?
Oh my goodness, if I could travel in the past,
Or the future.
I would travel to the past. And I think it's very interesting. I've always had this weird image in my mind of seeing myself just like seeing a pair of shoes walking in, like, you know, like those movies about England where like they throw the shit in the, you know, like in the
Middle Ages.
In the Middle Ages, you know, and it's really stinky and it's really dark.
That's where you want to go.
Out of all the incredible places that I could go, I would have to explore what that is.
Okay, fair enough. Talking about plants and herbalism, you know, if you would have a choice to come back in your next life and in the biodiversity of this planet, which one
I'm
would you
definitely
choose?
coming back as a whale.
A whale.
I'm coming back as a whale because I love whales.
Yeah.
And because I feel like, just living in a different ecosystem under the water.
Yeah.
Like how incredible. Yeah.
And what is your fondest memory of Namibia before we close?
It's the smell of when the rain hits like that red earth. It's this incredible smell that is just so beautiful. And when you see the horizon, this endless horizon, and there's these dark clouds and this like red soil of the desert and like green little shrubs. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then some elephants there.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here today, Angela. Really appreciate it. And last but not least, what is your next talk that you want to go look at?
Oh, that's
at a breaking convention.
I forgot the name of it now. There is one at 3:00 in the main hall, and it is on reform.
Okay, that's it.
I'm going to go watch that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.